Senator from New Mexico is recognized.
Let me start out by righting a wrong. I hadn't realized that Chairman Wyden, our colleague from Oregon, had not had a chance to visit the great state of New Mexico. And I will fix that right now and make sure that he is not only invited, but that we might seek to show him some of the incredible places that the two programs that we're talking about today have helped to preserve and protect and make as assets to our local economy in the state of New Mexico. As you heard from my colleague, Senator Udall, and our colleague, Chairman Wyden of Oregon as well, this month we celebrate two really incredible milestones in our country's conservation history. We celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act and the 50th anniversary of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And both of these programs have been etched into the history of my home state by New Mexico conservationists with names like Aldo Leopold, Senator Clinton P. Anderson, and Secretary of Interior Stuart Udall. When Senator Anderson steered the passage of the Wilderness Act here on the floor of the U.S. Senate, he said on August 20th of 1964, he said, quote, "In no area has this Congress more decisively served the future well-being of the nation than in passing legislation to conserve natural resources and to provide the means by which our people could enjoy them. While we stretch out the highways," he said, "to carry ever-expanding traffic, while we build whole new communities to house a growing population, and while we consume more acreage for a burgeoning industry, we have set aside part of our land as it was when human eye first saw it, unscarred by man, primeval, a memorial to the Creator who molded it," unquote. Senator Anderson was also unquestionably one of the principal architects of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And that 88th Congress, where so much of this work was done, was coined as the Conservation Congress. Now, LWCF is the primary tool our nation uses to fund the protection of our natural and cultural heritage. And I have worked diligently with my colleagues, including Senator Udall, his cousin Senator Udall of New Mexico, Senator Wyden of Oregon, and others to secure full and permanent funding for this program. But even 40 years before the enactment of the Wilderness Act, or LWCF, conservationist Aldo Leopold had the vision and influence to help protect 500,000 acres of mountains, rivers, and mesas in New Mexico, which eventually became the Gila Wilderness, in order to ensure a roadless and backcountry experience free of what Aldo Leopold called Ford dust for those hardy enough to saddle up or hike into the heart of this wild country. With the passage of the Wilderness Act, it became the National Forest System's very first designated wilderness area. And New Mexico is also where the idea of tribally administered wilderness became a reality when the Blue Lake was returned to Taos Pueblo. And former Senator Jeff Bingham's leadership was absolutely invaluable for conserving important public lands in New Mexico, such as the Rio Grande del Norte and Oregon Mountains Desert Peaks regions, both of which were designated national monuments within the last 2 years. But the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act and the Land and Water Conservation Fund is not just about the past, as we heard from my colleagues. The future of public lands conservation will depend on continued collaborative efforts of our elected officials, our business owners, tribal leaders, sportsmen, conservation organizations, outdoor retailers, and others who work together to protect America's most treasured natural landscapes. And our efforts should continue our proud bipartisan history. After all, it was Representative John Saylor, a Republican from Pennsylvania, who was the lead sponsor and champion in the House of Representatives for the Wilderness Act. And it was former Republican Senator Pete Domenici of my home state who championed legislation to designate the Sandia Wilderness, a place that I look upon every time I go home to Albuquerque, who said at the time that the area, quote, forms a beautiful natural backdrop for the city, which all the residents can enjoy. In New Mexico, hunters and anglers, campers and acequia parciantes, chili farmers and urban dwellers all have a deep connection to the outdoors and benefit from the recreation, wildlife, and the water that wilderness provides. Many of my own most formative moments, decisions, memories, and turning points have occurred in these public wildlands. I remember a trip with my wife, Julie, to the Irish wilderness in Missouri, a trip that we made as we were leaving our college days behind there in the Midwest and heading back west to New Mexico to start our new life together. And in 2001, shortly after 9/11, I backpacked through 53 miles of the Gila Wilderness and decided on that trip to run for a seat on the Albuquerque City Council. I have many cherished memories from the trips my wife and I have made over the years, along the spines of the American Rockies, the Sangre de Cristos, the Tetons, in places with names like the Pecos Wilderness, South San Juan, Jedediah Smith, and down canyons with names like Dark Canyon, Desolation Canyon, Gray, Grand Gulch, the Goosenecks, the San Juan, and of course, the Chama River Canyon near my home. Wilderness is in my blood, and I make no apologies for believing that some places are so very special, Mr. President, that we will never improve upon them. These are the places worth fighting for. I'm committed to carry on my state's rich conservation history, and in fact, Senator Tom Udall and I have introduced legislation to designate special places like the Columbine Hondo in Taos County, the San Antonio River and Ute Mountain in the Rio Grande del Norte National Monument as new wilderness areas. And it's clear that conservation and growing our economy are inextricably linked. Protected wild places contribute to the New Mexico economy in a robust and sustainable outdoor recreation community, which generates $6.1 billion in consumer spending every year in the state, gives us 68,000 New Mexico jobs and $1.7 billion in wages and salaries, according to the Outdoor Industry Association. The new Rio Grande del Norte National Monument in northern New Mexico has already yielded economic benefits since its designation. After less than 1 year since it was designated a national monument, the local community saw a 40% increase in visitors. As we look back on the last 50 years since the Wilderness Act and the Land and Water Conservation Fund both became law, let us also look to the future. My children love wild places as much as I do. My son Carter will be backpack hunting for elk with me later this fall. My son Micah will join me on BLM land to chase mule deer. They have hiked in the Columbine Hondo Wilderness Study Area. They've fished in the Cruces Basin Wilderness. And it's up to all of us to ensure that their children have the same opportunities that we had and that we've shared with their generation. I'll close, Mr. President, with a quote from Aldo Leopold's book, A Sand County Almanac. He said, "When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." Thank you, Mr. President.